Thank you, Jeff, for being here and for this terrific partnership. I've already heard some great feedback from today, so we're off to a great start, so thank you. So, Jeff and I were talking, and we'd only have 30 minutes, and we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for all of you to ask Jeff anything and everything that's on your mind. So I'll just get us started with a couple of questions. Actually, we do a training program at JPMorgan Chase. It's called CEO Bootcamp, and we did one about a year and a half ago, and we typically go off-site so that we can really get a sense of how other companies operate. And so I had the good fortune of coming to a boot camp here at LinkedIn. So just about a year and a half ago, I was in a group where Jeff came and spoke to us, and so I learned a lot of great things from Jeff just in that short session. One thing that I did learn is that we have something in common, that we are both Duke fans. And
I'm not necessarily a Duke fan.
I'm
a Coach K coaching fan.
Okay.
People oftentimes think I'm a Blue Devils fan.
Okay.
Not to be confused. So.
Okay.
Huge Coach K fan. I think he's the best coach of the modern era.
Okay, so we have that in common then. And what I learned, what I didn't know about Coach K, was the whole next play mantra of Coach K. And so I learned that from you, and I now drive my children completely crazy because I'm on the sidelines yelling next play when I can tell that they are, brooding over something that just went wrong. And so now they say, Mom, please, we know it, we hear your voice, you don't need to say it anymore. So I thank you for that. But can you just share your perspective on that term?
Sure. So before I get into that, where's Wilbur's? You guys in the house? There's Wilbur's. All right. And Campbell's? There's Campbell's. And Jerky XP? All right. So Wilbur's, you brought snacks? And what about you guys? You did bring jerky? Where is it? It's back there?
Okay.
Oh, very nice. I didn't see any. All right. And how about the Campbell's folks? Wait. Everyone's saying they didn't see any jerky. You guys related?
Yeah, like
twins. All right. Yeah. All right. Let me see this stuff. Let's see. Jerky XP. So this is for gamers?
Yeah.
Does it like have caffeine in it and stuff? Like.
They have enough. They already have enough caffeine.
All right.
No more caffeine.
So a friend of mine started a competitor, I guess, Perky Jerky.
Oh yeah.
He's a fraternity brother of mine. So yeah. So have any of you appeared on Shark Tank? Oh, wow. That's so cool. How'd you do?
Yeah.
You got all five? Oh, that's fantastic. Has it aired? It already aired? Nice. When I was looking over your bios, that was the thing that kind of jumped out. It seemed like an episode of Shark Tank. So the ideas were so great and diverse, and I love that show. I watch it with our little kids. They love it. Okay, so the next play philosophy. So when I was at Yahoo, I was reading an article on Yahoo Sports, and it turned out it had been written by a guy who had played for Coach K, and he turned into a sports journalist. And he was talking about the fact that, unbeknownst to most people, every time up and down the court at the completion of a sequence, offensive end, defensive end, regardless of how the play turned out, it could have been spectacular, it could have been a complete failure, Coach K yells, next play. And the whole point of it is he doesn't want people lamenting something that just took place for too long, and he doesn't want people overly celebrating something that just took place. He wants them spending a moment reflecting on it and then immediately moving on to the next play. And it has served the Duke Blue Devils extremely well. As we were just talking about, I think, at least in my opinion, Coach K is arguably the best coach in any sport in the modern era, post John Wooden. And so I was really struck by that, and I started using it as an executive at Yahoo with my team, and it seemed to resonate pretty well. And then kind of tucked it away as a managerial device for a number of years, got to LinkedIn, and as we were filing to go public, I was thinking about the best device I could use, the best mechanism I could use to ensure that people didn't get fixated on going public and they didn't feel like that was the end game, that this was just one stepping stone on the way towards our ultimate goal, which is our mission statement. And then eventually the realization of our vision. And so I dusted off the whole next play mantra. And when we filed to go public, we did it as an all hands. I wanted the company to hear about it simultaneously as we were doing it, literally. So our general counsel was at the printers and gave me a call and said, okay, we're doing it. And I said, we just filed to go public. And then immediately started talking about next play. And every now and again, you just stumble across a mantra or device, something that is incredibly simple and intuitive and yet profoundly valuable to people. And this was a perfect example of that. So The team afterwards, I tried to make it, we were still a very small company, relatively speaking. We're 9,200 people today. When I joined, we were 338 people. But at the time, I wanted to walk around and try to shake everyone's hand and just say thank you. And as I was doing that, every single team I spoke to, I asked what they were working on, and people were incredibly excited. And then they would say, but we're on to our next play. Literally, like every single person. And I wasn't expecting that. So the message, there was very strong message pull-through. And when we actually rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, we printed up T-shirts, and it had our ticker and the date of going public on the front. It had next play on the back. And people still wear them. So it's become like the unofficial mantra for the company.
It's super, super. And so one other topic I know that you're passionate about and you spoke about that day was compassionate management. And something you said that day that I still have in my notebook because I wrote it down. You said, be compassionate with those you like least and coach, but don't problem solve. So can you just talk about compassionate management?
Yeah, so those are two different things. I think they're both really important. And on the be compassionate most with the people you like least, it was actually a byproduct of a question that I get quite a bit when talking about the importance of managing compassionately, which is it's easy to be compassionate with people you care about and people you like. But how can you be compassionate? Are you expected to be compassionate with the people you don't care for and you don't like? And the point is compassion is not conditional. And where it's most valuable is when you're working with someone or dealing with someone that you may not like as much or who you may not feel likes you. So managing compassionately is arguably my first principle of management. It's certainly become an important foundational element here at LinkedIn in terms of how we treat one another. And long story short, I was in an environment, I was working for someone who was treating someone on the team that worked for them. They were impatient with them and growing increasingly frustrated. They were making jokes at this person's expense. And it was hard watching this, especially at staff meetings where we all reported to the guy who was kind of treating this person a little unfairly. And so at a one-on-one with myself and my manager, I said, you know, the next time you feel like undermining this person and making a joke at their expense, you should go find a mirror somewhere and take it out on yourself because you're responsible for them. They're in the role because you want them in the role. And you're clearly frustrated because they're not doing the role exactly the way you want them to be doing the role as opposed to you playing to their strengths. And you know exactly what they're good at and not good at. So why do you continue to perpetuate this? And so we had a good chat about that. And then a couple of weeks later, he circled back to me and he said, thank you for the advice. That was really meaningful. And I'm going to put it into motion. I think it's making a real big difference. And as he was saying this, I realized I was doing the exact same thing with someone on my team. I mean, the exact same thing. There was someone on my team, and I was expecting them to do things exactly the way that I did them. And I wasn't recognizing where they had their own strengths, if not genius. And this person was not set up to be successful. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of less experienced executives make. And I was certainly one of those people where, you know, we're all egocentric. It's human nature, not egomaniacal. We're all egocentric. We see the world through our own lens, and then we project that onto other people. And it's usually through more experience over time where you recognize people have their own way of seeing the world. They have their own perspective, their own values, their own ethos. They were raised a certain way. They have their own baggage, their own hopes, their own dreams. There's a lot going on there. And to just assume that everyone should be doing something the way you do, especially because, or in light of the fact that you've become successful and you're now in a position of influence and you're responsible for things, it's not a very effective way of managing, and it's certainly not an effective way of leading people. So in that moment, this is, you know, it's probably 10 years ago, I just decided that I was going to aspire to manage compassionately every opportunity I got. And so that's really the impetus for it all, and it's proven to be incredibly effective. If you're interested in managing compassionately, it's important to recognize the difference between compassion and empathy, where empathy is feeling what another person feels. It's feeling the exact same thing the other person feels. Compassion is a more objective form of empathy where you can create a little bit of space between you and the other person. And that space allows you to understand their perspective, walk a mile in their shoes, and then do something about it. So if they're suffering, you can alleviate their suffering. That's what compassion's all about. And it's a really, really important distinction that a lot of people, particularly in Western cultures, they think of empathy and compassion synonymously. And that can be a very dangerous thing, because empathy, if you're feeling what another person feels, the Dalai Lama, I think, has created a really strong way of visualizing this. So if you're walking along a trail somewhere and you come across somebody in the mountains, and you come across, not that this happens to any of us on any given day, certainly not in Silicon Valley, but you're walking along a trail in a mountain like Tibet, and you come across someone and they are being crushed by a boulder on their chest. They're suffocating. The empathetic response is to feel the same sense of suffocation. And if that's the case, you're going to be rendered as helpless as they are. You can't do anything about it. The compassionate response is to recognize that they are suffocating. Maybe you think back to an experience you had where you were suffocating. You know how much they're suffering. And you do everything within your power to alleviate their suffering and get the boulder off their chest. That's the difference between the two. So what does that mean in day-to-day business and when you're managing other people, when you're dealing with other people? Think about the last time you were in conflict with someone you were working with, which happens pretty frequently because we're all human beings. You may have even be able to think of an example today. And more often than not, when we become frustrated with other people, we have a tendency to immediately knee-jerk to their nefarious intention. They're being political. They're trying to get one over on you. They must not like you. There's something wrong with them. All of these negative thoughts, as opposed to actually taking a moment to become a spectator to your own thoughts, especially when you become emotional, which is what happens if someone gets angry at people. We get defensive, we get angry back at them. And if you can be a spectator to what's going on, you can start to ask yourself, why are you getting emotional? And perhaps more importantly, why are they getting emotional? What's going on? It could be as simple as they're having a bad day. It could be as complex as you've triggered some kind of experience they've had in their past that has no bearing on what's going on in real time, but they're having some kind of post-traumatic stress from an experience they had at a previous company or the previous manager. I mean, there's virtually infinite possibilities as to what's created the problem. And if you can take a moment to think about where it's coming from, you can do something about it. And it's proven to be an invaluable, absolutely invaluable managerial device. With regard to coaching and problem solving, this is particularly germane to a small business, especially as your businesses become larger. A lot of you are here because of the success that you've experienced, and you've experienced success because you're all really good at what you do. Every single person in here is good at what you do. And that works really well, producing and creating and marketing and selling and distributing, whatever core competencies you all have developed. And there may be multiple core competencies that you've developed. And those will serve you well up until a certain point. Because when your organizations start to scale, you can't continue to do it all yourself. But that will be the natural knee-jerk response because you're so good at it. So you bring other people into your organization, and you created these businesses. So you know the business is cold. And you're probably incredibly good at executing and solving problems. So a problem arises, people on your team come to you, and what's your instinct? Solve the problem. That will work up until a certain point, and beyond that certain point, if you continue to do that, and you're not coaching people to be able to solve the problems on their own, and more importantly, coaching them to be able to coach their people, the people that they're ultimately going to hire, you're not going to be able to scale. All you're going to be doing is reacting and fighting fires. And so a huge part of the transition as you continue to scale is taking the time to coach as opposed to constantly executing. And that's a really important part of the evolution of a company and a leader.
So that's a great segue for you guys. I'll turn it over to you guys. What questions do you have? Yeah.
So when you used to like execute it and you're
Sorry, can you just tell me your name and the businesses that you guys run? That's okay.
My name is Brian Taylor. I'm the owner of Harlem Doggy Day Spa, cage-free doggy day care in Harlem. So my question is, you know, I've been able to build a level of trust with my clients. You know, they can reach me in many aspects, from text messages, email, call me directly, if whatever they needed, you know, and then they trust me because I go into people's home at times to walk their dogs. You know, I do it to clients because I started off as a dog walker. There's certain clients I still do that too. So in this past year, this past summer, I've hired new staffs that I have, and one in particular is very friendly. All the owners, they love him when he's off work, when he's heading home. If he sees a dog, he's introducing himself to the dog and the owner. So now I've been giving him more responsibility, like going into someone's home, you know, and which is, I mean, I'm bonded for it, but it's pretty scary, you know. So now when things happens, how do you like train or build yourself from being the one that put out the fire than being the one that's coaching? Because I'm so passionate about what I do, and my clients know that, and my staff know that, but at the same time, it gets frustrated sometimes when I'm trying to coach, but they see it as me being frustrated. How do you separate your emotion from that and be able to continue professionally just develop yourself as someone that's going to be able to coach people or empower them enough to do decisions? Like right now, this is the most I've ever been for my staff. So I'm getting text messages and emails about this and that going on, and I'm like, listen, we have procedures in place.
So there's expressing frustration. You may be getting frustrated. This is actually exactly what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You probably are getting frustrated because the person that you hired may not be as adept at doing things or as instinctual at doing things as you are. That's the reason you started the business and you're running the business, and that's the reason this person, at least for now, is working for you. So the first thing to think about, this is that whole notion of becoming a spectator to your thoughts, especially when you become emotional, which is pretty close to impossible, because once you become emotional, you're not thinking rationally. So it's in those moments you have to really kind of quiet your mind, be in the moment, and ask yourself why you're getting frustrated. So are you frustrated because you've already explained something 2 or 3 times and the person continues to make the same mistake over and over? Are you frustrated because this person made a mistake that's completely reasonable, but it looks bad on you and it looks bad on your company, and there's no way of distinguishing the company and you? That company is a byproduct, it's a manifestation of you. This is a very valid reason to be frustrated. But if you're expressing the frustration, that person's going to get defensive. They're not going to be comfortable being vulnerable, which is when some of us can do our best learning. They may not be as upfront about the things they need to get better at and where they feel like they may be falling down. And so that's the difference between coaching and just kind of venting. Coaching is taking the time to understand where that person's coming from. Why did they make the mistake that they're making? Have you taken the time to teach them properly? A lot of times we'll get frustrated at the person we're teaching without recognizing the fact that we may not be doing a great job doing the teaching. So there's a whole litany of questions you could be asking yourself at that time. But I would take a moment the next time you feel that frustration, ask yourself why you're getting frustrated. It's one of the single most important things you can do in that moment. And then kind of take a deep breath and then put yourself in that person's shoes and understand why they made the choices that they did and what you can do about it, how you can help them.
Yeah, because I tell them, like, listen, no matter what you do, it's fixable. There's people trusting us, and we would have to do something really, really crazy for us to lose their business. So, you know, you've been working with me for a while. You understand how things work. You understand the policies. But it's okay to mess up, and you just can't be frustrated when you're not getting the same results. And if clients are saying, "Where's Brian? I want to speak to Brian," and Brian is not available. So it's just all with that, just trying to feel comfortable. It's a very scary space to be, you know.
Okay. I've really been trying to learn how to manage my emotions with managing people and get their best work by giving them the optimal environment. What books have you read that you would recommend that can help foster this ability to step outside and to get some perspective in the middle of an emotional moment?
So there's 2. So where I was talking about the delineation between compassion and empathy, that's The Art of Happiness. So that's Howard Cutler, and that's the teachings of the Dalai Lama. There's also an Art of Happiness at Work, and that may be even more relevant to what you were just describing. But that was kind of a game changer for me. I read that book when I was about 30, and it's been on my nightstand ever since, literally for 15 years. I haven't read it cover to cover since then, but I like seeing it. It reminds me of everything. I'm being serious. Yeah, it brings me back to that kind of energy. And that's one. The other one's Conscious Business by a guy named Fred Kaufman, who I liked so much and respected so much I hired. So he runs talent development here, and he runs organizational development. Really, really talented guy, incredibly enlightened guy. I describe him as almost like a Buddhist libertarian. He was trained as an economist, and he's got a really unique perspective on the world. He founded a company called Axialent, which was leadership consulting and advisory, and he's got an incredibly valuable perspective on this stuff. And I've learned, he's become a friend and a mentor. I've learned a lot from him. But I think you'll enjoy that book. You'll enjoy both books, but the conscious business in particular, I think, is going to be relevant for what you were just asking me about.
Hi, I'm Maria from Real Good Fish, a community supported fishery down in Moss Landing. And my question is, with when you're being compassionate with people in management, when is letting someone go the compassionate thing to do?
So I was smiling because before we got on stage, Jennifer was just reminding me that the last time we saw each other was when we spent some time in a CEO boot camp for JP Morgan. And the very last question I got was from their head of talent, who heard me talking about managing compassionately and then asked the question that you just asked, which is, how do you let someone go if you're so focused on managing compassionately? And it's the most commonly asked question I get after talking about managing compassionately. As a matter of fact, I think I've been asked that as a follow-up question 100% of the time. And so the short answer is that when you know someone on your team is not getting the job done, the least compassionate thing you can do is let them stay in the job without making any changes, because they're not capable of doing the work. And over time, trust me, they're aware of the fact they can't do the job, but they may not be honest with themselves, and they may not be honest with you. I don't mean dishonest in a malicious way. I mean just not really accepting it. In over 20 years of managing people, not a single person that I've ever worked with or has worked for me has approached me and said they couldn't do their work. Not once. So, you a baseball fan at all? No? How many baseball fans here? So every time I ask that question, fewer and fewer hands go up. Does not bode well for Major League Baseball. I'm kind of being serious, like a focus test, focus group. Go Mets, yeah. I'm from New York, so I agree. Go Mets. I'm a Yankee fan, though. So, even if you're not a baseball fan, you may be familiar with a dynamic where if you're watching a game even casually, in the modern era of baseball, these pitchers are throwing harder and harder, and their arms can't last typically 9 innings. So at about the 5th or 6th inning, you may get a manager who comes out to the mound, and they ask the pitcher, how are you doing? And the better the pitcher, the more you can predict the response. So what do you think the response is when a manager says, how's your arm feeling? That's right. Have you ever seen a pitcher go, I feel like shit, here's the ball, take me out of the game? It just doesn't happen. It's not the pitcher's job to take himself out of the game. It's the manager's job. It's literally the manager's job. That's what they're there to do. So the second you ask yourself whether or not somebody on your team is capable of doing the job that you've asked them to do, the second you ask yourself that question, you already know the answer. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asking the question. Because if I asked you whether or not that person on your team is a superstar, if they were a superstar, how long would it take you to respond? Like literally, like a few hundred milliseconds. And then you'd go on and on about how great the person is. At least in my own experience, the second I ask myself or ask others around me, hey, what do you think of so-and-so? You think they're, I already know the answer. Otherwise, I wouldn't be asking the question. The key is then what you do with that. And so what I have found to be the most effective way of handling those situations is to create a timeline. To say, all right, look, I know this person's not capable of doing this job right now, as of right now, the way the job needs to get done. And then you sit down with them, and as transparently and constructively and compassionately as possible, you say, I'm rooting for you. I hired you. I want this to work. But right now there's a gap between what I expect in this role and the way you're doing the role. And so here's what we're going to do. And it depends on the person, it depends on the job, and it depends on the gap. And maybe 3 months, month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, who knows? But you say, we're going to work together over the next 6 months. I'm making it up. And over that 6-month time period, I'm going to do everything within my power to coach you and to get you above that bar. Everything within my power. And I'm going to be completely transparent with you throughout the process as to how you're doing. And if for whatever reason this is not working out, we're going to do something that is going to make sense for you. Maybe there's another role within the organization, a different role that plays to your strengths. Maybe there's a role outside the organization. But I'm here for you. I'm going to support you. That's the best way to handle those situations. More often than not, we ignore it or we rationalize it. And it's almost entirely out of fear. We're fearful of having the tough conversation. We're fearful of how they're going to respond. We're fearful of how their team is going to think of us. We're fearful of the inability to be able to replace them. Just fear, 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 fear. And, you know, as the person responsible for that role and that person, it's your job. It's incumbent upon you to do the right thing. But the irony of the question is that the least compassionate thing you can do in those situations is allow the person to remain in the role. And the reason is because they sense it and they feel it, and you can see it. It's kind of sad when someone is in over their heads and they're allowed to stay in that role for too long. You can see it in the body language. They start to kind of sink and slump. You can hear it in their voice. So whereas they once were very assertive and projecting themselves, they barely talk, and when they do, they're just kind of shadow of themselves. And the worst possible thing in these situations is that they're taking that energy not only to their teams and undermining the performance of the team and demoralizing the team, which also undermines your own credibility with the team because the team recognizes what's going on and you're not doing anything about it. So now they're questioning how effective you are as a manager. But the worst possible thing in all of that is they're bringing that energy home with them. And going all the way back to when we first started talking about compassion, it's actually on you. It's on me. It's on us as the managers. So I think the most compassionate thing you can do in those situations is be honest with the person and recognize their strengths and try to work with them. And if it doesn't work out, help them in some other capacity.
The team point is a really good one. In my experience, every time I've ever had to make that tough decision and always worried about the team, every single time the team actually respected the decision and felt relieved.
Hello, I am Cynthia Rivas with Azul Staffing, and my question, I know being compassionate is probably one of the key success to your success. What will be the top 3 keys to your particular success?
So when I'm typically asked the question we do a summer internship program. And I have a chance to sit down with our interns at the conclusion of the program, and inevitably I get the question, how can we as interns be successful? How can we realize what it is that we ultimately want to do? And I'll tell you the 3 things that I answer that question with. So the first is knowing what it is you ultimately want to accomplish. And I can't tell you, so for an intern or a new college graduate, it makes perfect sense that they may not know what it is that they want to do. But I can't tell you the number of people 5, 7, 10 years into their career still can't answer the question because they get swept up in these streams of opportunity. So a hot job, a hot company, more money, and they don't take the time to ask themselves what it is that they want to accomplish. And I think it's really important to take time out periodically. And one interesting exercise you can do is you look out 20 to 30 years down the path in your career, and then you look back on your career and you ask yourself, what is it that you wanted to accomplish? What legacy do you want to leave? And the more specific you can be, the more likely you are to manifest it. And I don't mean it in some new agey way, and I don't mean it in some predeterministic or fatalistic way. I mean, when you know what it is that you want to do, you start to manifest it explicitly and implicitly. When I was 24 years old, I sent a mock cover letter to my father describing what I wanted to do. I had asked him for some career advice, and he said, write it down and be as specific as you can. And long story short, I said, I wanted to work, this is a true story, I actually still have the cover letter. It was written, it was typed, actually, it wasn't written, but the paper is kind of yellowed a little bit over time. It was a couple of decades ago. But long story short, I said I wanted to work in the corporate development group for a major media conglomerate, for a whole host of reasons. I was very interested in digital. My father had been in media for a long time. I thought content programming was the way in which you would differentiate technology assets over time, et cetera. And I didn't know anything would come of it. And I shared it with my office mate. I worked at a consulting firm. I shared it with some other people because once I knew what it was, I was talking about it. And a few weeks later, my office mate got a call from a headhunter who was recruiting for the corporate development group at Warner Brothers. I hadn't even gotten my MBA yet, so I thought there was pretty close to 0% likelihood I would ever end up in a role like that. And he knew that's what I wanted to do, and he had just accepted admission into Harvard Business School. But he said, I know someone who's going to be interested in this role. And he gave the headhunter my name. And within 3 months, I was on a flight out to Burbank. So I believe this with every, and it's one of many, many examples, but I believe this with great, great conviction. If you don't know what it is that you ultimately want to accomplish, the next piece of advice, kind of a corollary, is to focus on the things that you're most passionate about and the things that you're most skilled at, and the intersection between those two things, not one at the exclusion of the other, which is a mistake I think a lot of people make. They're incredibly passionate about something, but they're not being honest with themselves about the skill set, or they're incredibly talented at something, but they can't stand doing it. And either path is a recipe for waking up several years down the road and kind of being unhappy and miserable. And the last thing I would say is part of that first dimension of knowing what it is that you want to do is if you don't know, and I think it's a lot less relevant for this group because you've all started your businesses, and I think at this point you have a pretty clear understanding of what it is you want. But for younger folks or for people who never ask themselves the question, if you really have no clue, you just try different things. And you're going to start to see certain things are resonating, and you're better at certain things than others. But it's a big world out there. So the more you can narrow it down, the more likely you are to make it happen. And the overarching takeaway there is the more specific you can be, the more successful you're going to be in achieving it. So that's one. Two is it's all about the people that you surround yourself with. And when I was younger, I thought it was all about my boss or my mentor. And what I've come to learn over time is that, especially in this knowledge-based economy, this more digital economy, this more networked economy where everything is connected and it's all about the information and knowledge we possess, that it comes down to the people that you surround yourself with, the people you work for, the people you work with, and the people that work for you. And so you should never compromise on ensuring that you're working with people who are amazing at what they do, and perhaps equally, if not more importantly, share your values and are committed to the same kind of culture that you want to create and develop. It's really important. It's not just about being talented. These also should be people that you want to work with, that you look forward to work with, and you're not compromising those values. Because all too often, we overlook people acting in really bad ways because they're so talented. And it brings everybody down over time, especially you. And then lastly is to always be learning. The days where you go to school, you learn a skill, and then you can practice that, and you have a career or vocation for decades are long gone. Innovation, the rate of innovation is actually eclipsing our collective ability to learn these innovations. And so we have to redouble our efforts to just constantly be improving ourselves. And that doesn't mean just learning it through your own means and mechanisms. It goes back to the talent issue because you can't possibly know everything. So make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that complement your knowledge base. But it helps in this day and age if you are naturally passionate about learning or intellectually curious. It can make all the difference. I mean, it's such a blessing and a gift in today's era. So the importance of knowing what it is you ultimately want to accomplish, surrounding yourself with only the best people you can find, and to always be learning.
Actually, something that you said that I had written down combines the last two, which is you had said recognize when you have extraordinary people and learn from them. So that was a great piece of advice.
Yeah, I think we've got time for just one more question.
Just one more. Sure. So I would say for me, absolutely surrounding myself with the best people. I learned probably about when I was 30. That's sort of an inflection point in my career where I was starting to manage as opposed to do. And when you are an achiever, as we all are, that's a hard transition to go to managing. And the first time I remembered that I had someone join my team who was that person who it took a half a a millisecond to say, she's a rock star, it was such a relief. And I was able to do so much more because I was able to let go. So surrounding yourself with people that are smarter and better than you was certainly a key. I think being a great partner, willing to own issues outside of your direct responsibility, and so to help the team problem solve through anything, I would say as well. But being a great partner, being able to problem solve, and surrounding yourself with great people.
Yep. Am I good? My name's Will. I'm from Gorilla Gravity. I asked Alan the last time where he just spoke. Basically, I told him that I was intrigued by the level of scalability that Silicon Valley startups are able to achieve, and kind of how they do that, or what sort of pitfalls to avoid when scaling and that sort of thing. He's basically said, "Oh, I just recognized that I can't scale like that," and we turned it over to Jeff. So, so I was curious what your pitch was like when they were like, "Hey, we want to take this company from 338 people to 9,200." How you were like, "I got this. This is what we're gonna do." To win them over.
Yeah, so it wasn't that kind of pitch. So they just, Reed in particular, Reed Hoffman, who was Alan's co-founder, had asked me to get involved. Reed had been the original CEO. He had hired a professional CEO. He took on president of product. As president of product, he was reporting to the CEO, who then reported back to Reed as chairman of the board and the largest shareholder. So you can imagine how that worked out. They actually, there was a tremendous amount of mutual respect between the two of them. They liked each other quite a bit, but it just wasn't set up to be successful. So by the time he had started discussions with me, he had recognized that someone needed to be set up to be successful. Someone needed that kind of decision-making authority. And I think that's part of the answer to the question, which is, in order to successfully scale, you have to have very clear accountability and leadership. And I give Reed a lot of credit, and Alan, for recognizing what they could do and recognizing that there may be other people who could do some things. It goes back to what we were just talking about, is complementing yourself with people with skills that can really round out the team. So, one of the most frequently asked questions I described earlier that I get from interns is how to be successful. And one of the most frequently asked questions I've gotten, period, over the last 7 years at being at LinkedIn is, what keeps me up at night? People are fascinated. They always frame it the same way. What keeps you up at night? And I sleep very well, thankfully. I think people are really interested in what I'm worried about. And I've always answered the question the exact same way. When I first started, December of 2008, I got asked that question. And today I get asked the question. And regardless of whether we had 338 people or we have 9,200 people, it's focus and scale. Is ensuring that we can focus, be super focused on our core value proposition and make it happen, bring it to life, create value for our members and customers, do fewer things done better, not get distracted by all of the various opportunities. And the other thing is that we can scale effectively, that we have the right talent, the right people, as we just talked about, that we have the right processes, which is not nearly as glamorous as just pure innovation, and then we have the right infrastructure. And all too often, you get a successful startup and it creates some kind of innovation, some kind of disruption, some way of doing something that hadn't been done previously that creates overwhelming demand. And you get hooked on that. It's a great feeling. And so you want to just keep doing that over and over again. And unfortunately, that's not the way you scale an organization. As a matter of fact, at some point, if that's all you're focused on, you will not scale. You will not have the right people in place to scale, going back to that whole point about taking the time to coach and not problem solve. You will not have the right processes because that takes time. And it takes a lot of trial and error to see what works for your organization. And it takes agility and adaptability, because what works as a process when you're 15 people doesn't work when you're 150 people or 1,500 people or 15,000 people. And lastly, you have to be really focused on investing in the infrastructure to make it all happen. And yet people want to focus on just cranking out the next product and the next product and the next product. and you can start to generate serious debt. I don't mean necessarily capital debt. In Silicon Valley, we talk about tech debt, where everyone wants to crank out the next innovation without making sure that the underlying infrastructure can support all of that innovation. And the infrastructure you had when there were 1,000 people using your product or 100,000 people using your product is really different than the infrastructure required to serve 100 million people. And if you don't take the time to hit the pause button and invest properly in your underlying infrastructure, you will never scale. So one of my favorite metaphors along these lines is that managing a hypergrowth company is like putting a rocket out into space. And if you're off by inches at launch, you're going to be off by miles when you're out in orbit by virtue of the sheer velocity that you're moving. And so in these early days, when you're growing as quickly as all of your businesses are growing, that's the time to take a step back and invest in the foundational dimensions of your business. The talent, the processes, and the infrastructure. And if you don't want to be focused on that for whatever reason, maybe it's not in your wheelhouse, maybe you're not as passionate about it, just make sure you're hiring people who are going to be really focused on it. Yeah, they'll take you a long way.
Great. So Jennifer, Jeff, thanks again so much for coming in and speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.